He tasted my blood while I slept. When I struck him, the mark vanished from his pale cheek before my palm stopped stinging. He said he could stop me leaving, but that would not make me choose him. Then I caught his open collar and pulled him down. His hands froze at my waist, waiting for permission. The vampire had studied me through every stolen camera. Now I had to decide whether his restraint was proof or another trap. Chapter 1. The Screens. At 12:17 in the morning, my central monitor turned on by itself. The laptop followed, then the phone charging beside my bed lit so brightly, its white glow cut across the ceiling. None of them showed Jacob Rosier's house. They showed mine. On the central screen, I sat at my desk in an oversized cream sweater, shoulders curved toward the keyboard, my short black pixie cut mussed around my ears. The angle came from directly behind me. I turned. There was only the wall, a narrow shelf of hard drives, and the lamp Daniel had been promising to fix for 3 weeks. The laptop showed my kitchen. The camera seemed positioned above the sink, facing the bowl where I kept spare keys. I did not have a camera there. My phone showed my bed. I was asleep in the recording, one hand tucked beneath my cheek, the other closed around the edge of the blanket. The view came from beside the mattress, close enough to show the short black strands flattened at my nape. I reached for the keyboard. Text replaced the image on the central monitor. "You left me alone." My fingers stopped over the keys. The sentence vanished. "I have never left you alone." The bedroom recording resumed. A man's hand entered the frame. Pale skin, long fingers, an antique silver ring engraved with an emblem I had known most of my life. The hand brushed the short hair at my nape away from my skin. I felt the motion as though it were happening again. The specific pressure of it, deliberate as a signature. I tried to copy the file. The progress bar reached 1%. The image tore into black static. For a single frame, a tall shape stood beside my bed, blurred at the edges as if the machine could not decide what it had seen. Then every screen went dark. I sat in my chair and listened to the fan inside my desktop slow to a whisper. I had spent years entering places I was not invited into. I had read messages sent at 3 in the morning, watched private rooms after their owners believed the cameras were off, and learned the shape of one man's life so thoroughly I sometimes knew what he would do before he did it. I was good at it. Skill had become another name for safety. Until that night, the worst thing waiting on the other side of a screen had been discovery. The first time Jacob Rosier watched me, I was a child beneath a winter tree. Chapter 2. The Winter Tree. My mother had pulled the car onto the roadside because I had been sick. I remember the weak sun, the wet grass flattened under my shoes, and the sweet stuck to the roof of my mouth. I wandered farther than she allowed. The tree stood alone beyond a shallow ditch. Its branches were bare, and beneath them was a boy who did not look like a boy once I came close enough. He was pale and perfectly still. Brown hair touched the tops of his ears. His coat was too fine for the roadside, dark blue with a burgundy lining that flashed when the wind moved it. He had the face of someone young and the eyes of someone who had already grown tired of everything around him. Blue eyes, narrow, fixed entirely on me.
Niana.
I stopped with one shoe sinking into the mud.
How do you know my name?
Your mother called it from the road.
I glanced back. The car was visible through the trees, smaller than I expected. My mother stood beside it, searching the verge.
You are listening?
I was nearby.
That answer should have ended my curiosity. His attention settled on me with weight. Adults usually looked past children while pretending otherwise. He looked at me as though there were nothing else in the field, with the focused patience of someone who had been waiting. He lifted one hand. I thought he meant to touch my forehead. His fingers came toward me with an odd care, and I stepped closer because I had not yet learned that careful movements can be more dangerous than sudden ones. Then I remembered the sweet in my palm. It had softened from the heat of my hand. I broke it badly, leaving one half larger than the other, and offered him the larger piece. He stopped. The wind moved his coat again. Nothing else about him changed.
It's strawberry.
He looked down at it as if I had handed him a small living thing.
You don't like it?
I have not decided.
That means you don't.
His mouth almost moved, not a smile, the memory of one perhaps, something that had once lived in that face, and left only the shape behind. He took the piece without eating it. From his pocket, he removed a small metal keepsake on a dark cord, shaped like a narrow shield, engraved with an unfamiliar emblem, 2 intersecting lines inside a circle, simple enough to remember and old enough to feel like it belonged on a sealed tomb. He pressed it into my palm.
What is it?
Keep it,
Why?
So I will recognize you if I see it again.
My mother called my name. Much closer now, I looked toward the road. When I turned back, the space beneath the tree was empty. For years, I treated that encounter like one of those childhood memories that survive because they make no sense. I kept the emblem. I wore it beneath my clothes when I wanted courage, though I never admitted that was what I was doing. The stranger's face faded before the feeling he had left behind, the particular weight of being looked at as though you were not a coincidence. No one looked at me that way again. Not until I was an adult, awake too late with a muted interview playing in the corner of my screen. Jacob Rosier sat beneath studio lights in a mist gray suit, answering questions about a new film. The host leaned toward him with the bright, practiced intimacy famous people inspire. He gave her exactly enough warmth to make the audience believe they had seen something private. Then he adjusted his cuff. An antique silver ring caught the light. I paused the frame. The emblem on his hand matched the keepsake beside my keyboard. A common design, I decided, though my hands were already searching his name with dates attached. Jacob Rosier, at an awards ceremony 19 years earlier. Jacob Rosier, outside a theater 18 years earlier. Jacob Rosier in a newspaper archive when I was still losing baby teeth. His hair changed slightly, his clothes followed fashion, his face did not age. I should have stopped there. Instead, I opened another window. Chapter 3. The Open Door. Jacob's public life was built like a museum display, beautiful, lit from the correct angle, and protected by glass. His interviews were rehearsed without sounding rehearsed. His social accounts revealed locations only after he had left them. His assistants rotated phones, deleted metadata, and routed private scheduling through layered services. Fan photographs showed what his management permitted fans to see. I began with public records, then transportation logs, then a production contractor whose password had appeared in an old breach. Stalking was an ugly word. Research sounded cleaner, and at the time I could still pretend the distinction had harmed no one. The private network around his home was better than most corporate systems. It separated household devices from private records, rotated its certificates, and required hardware authentication. Someone competent had been paid to assume that competence would eventually fail. One device was different. An old household controller had a weakness so neat it looked almost decorative. Not open exactly. A door with a lock installed 1 millimeter out of alignment. I watched it for 4 nights before touching it. On the 5th, I entered. The first security layer accepted the abandoned credential I had recovered. The second issued a silent challenge that nearly severed my connection. I rerouted through a dormant household account, lost access, regained it, and held my breath while the system considered whether I belonged. Then a single interior camera appeared. The room was pale stone and dark wood. A long window reflected the city without revealing its location. At 1:43 a.m., Jacob entered wearing the deep blue overcoat I remembered from the interview photographs. He closed the door, removed the coat, and stood beneath the camera. There was blood on the edge of his white cuff, not much. A narrow, dark stain where the fabric touched his wrist. He examined it without alarm, rolled the cuff once, and washed it in a porcelain basin. The water pinked, then cleared. I should have closed the feed. My hand moved to the save command instead. The moment felt stolen in a way public images never did. No editor had chosen the angle. I believed he had no idea anyone was looking. That was what I believed. I returned the next night. He came into range wearing a loose ivory shirt and unbuttoned it with the absent slowness of a tired man who had forgotten he could be seen. The fabric slipped from his shoulders. He was leaner than his suit suggested, broad through the chest, every movement restrained and exact. My face warmed. I hated that response enough to keep watching. Before leaving the room, he reached toward the camera housing. His palm covered the lens. The screen went black for less than a second. When the image returned, he was gone. Except he was not. A pale shape remained beside the window, the outline of his shoulder, the turn of his head. It lingered for 4 seconds while the timestamp continued forward. The room was visibly empty behind it. Cached footage, I decided. A compression error, light retained by a damaged sensor. I saved that clip too. In the final corrupted frame, his face was turned toward the lens. After that, one camera became 3. 3 became access to his private calendar, fragments of messages, vehicle records, call logs, and the smart devices in rooms he used regularly. I learned he did not sleep every night. Sometimes he lay motionless until dawn with his eyes open. Sometimes he vanished after sunset and returned before morning in different clothes. He never ate where a camera could see him. He ignored almost every flirtation sent to his private phone, including messages from people whose names appeared weekly in entertainment news. I knew which interviews angered him because he removed his cufflinks the moment he came home. I knew which scripts interested him because he read them standing rather than sitting. I knew he touched the ring on his right hand whenever Helen Langford, his manager, said something he did not intend to obey. I watched because he was unreachable. A screen required nothing from me except attention. It could not reject me, misunderstand me, or ask why a woman with enough skill to enter a celebrity's home network could not answer a knock at her own door. I told myself I was studying him. I told myself I would stop. I did not stop. Then someone inside Jacob's security system found me. Chapter 4: The Trace. The first sign was a small delay in one of the feeds. Then every access token I had built expired within 12 seconds. A trace moved backward through my false identities with methodical patience. Whoever ran it ignored the obvious route. He removed my options one by one and watched where I moved next. The way you clear a room when you already know where someone is hiding. I should have severed the connection. I tightened my grip on the mouse and seeded false routing data in 2 cities, shifted through a contractor account dormant for 11 months, and re-entered through the household controller. The trace followed. I split my traffic, sacrificed one identity, and used the noise to restore partial access. On one monitor, a map narrowed from country to city, then to my district. My pulse beat against the small scar on my index finger where I had once slipped while opening a server case. I pushed harder. The trace corrupted, not failed, corrupted. The path redirected hundreds of kilometers away, with timestamps so clean they would have fooled anyone who had not watched the route being built in real time. I leaned back and breathed through my mouth. I even laughed, one short sound that surprised me. The corrupted route looked clean enough to believe. I believed it. That made me careless. I restored the bedroom camera first. Jacob stood beside it, dressed in a dark plum shirt with the collar open. He was so close only half his face fit inside the frame.
You almost lost me.
His head turned toward the lens before I finished the sentence. I froze. He remained there for several seconds, blue eyes fixed on the camera. Then he stepped away as if nothing had happened. Perhaps the microphones had activated with the feed. I checked the settings. Every audio channel was disabled. I sat very still for a long time after that, my hands in my lap, the fans running, the cursor blinking in an empty field. The laughing felt very far away now. Chapter 5: The Invitation. Daniel knocked the next morning with my food in one hand and irritation in the other. He lived in the apartment beside mine. Through the wall, he could hear when I typed until dawn, though not what I was doing. When the hours became unreasonable, he tapped twice. I usually tapped twice back. It meant I was alive. It meant he could stop worrying without asking questions I would not answer. That morning I had missed the taps and left a delivery outside, long enough for condensation to soak through the paper bag. I minimized Jacob's feed before opening the door. Daniel stood under the warm hallway light in an olive jacket damp from rain. His blonde hair curled more when wet, and the small scar near his eyebrow whitened when he frowned.
You know this was becoming soup out here.
He lifted the bag.
It was soup when I ordered it. Then it was becoming a public health event.
I stepped aside before remembering that stepping aside was permission. He noticed. Daniel always noticed, but he waited until I nodded before entering. He set the food on my kitchen counter, glanced at the closed curtains, and looked back at me. His eyes were warm brown and much too awake.
Did you sleep?
Yes,
That was fast.
I'm efficient.
At line?
I took the bag from him.
At sleeping?
He smiled briefly.
Have dinner with me.
No.
I hadn't finished.
You were going to add a time and a place. My answer covers the structure.
His mouth tightened. He put both hands into his jacket pockets.
The invitation stays open once, but I'm not doing this every week. Asking through the door, getting nothing, then hearing 2 taps at midnight because you want to know I'm still next door.
He left without punishing me for refusing. That was worse than if he had. For the rest of the day, I tried to work while Jacob's private rooms waited behind minimized windows. Through the wall came the scrape of sandpaper. Daniel had decided the warped secondhand bookshelf could still be repaired. A man miles away gave me everything without being asked because I had stolen the means to take it. A man on the other side of my wall asked permission and accepted no. At 8:06 that evening, I sent Daniel a message. Dinner, Friday, you choose. On the live feed, Jacob stopped moving. He stood in his kitchen holding a clear glass, filled with something dark red. His gaze went straight to the camera I was using. Then the glass broke in his hand. Liquid and blood ran between his fingers. A bright shard stayed pressed into his palm. He did not look down. His face held no expression at all. Then he closed his bleeding hand around the camera until the image went black. For the first time in years, I wondered whether I had been alone while watching him. Chapter 6, Come Back. Daniel chose a restaurant with amber lamps and no overhead glare. He had remembered I hated it. I noticed that, and I noticed the nearest exit, the mirrored panel behind the bar, and the security camera above the register. Habits do not become innocent because you wear a dusty lavender blouse instead of a sweater. Rain streaked the window beside us. My phone lay face down near my hand.
You can turn it over.
I'm being polite.
You've checked its reflection in the window 4 times.
I like knowing the time.
There's a clock over my shoulder.
I don't trust public clocks.
He laughed, and against my better judgment, I did too. It lasted about a second. The food arrived. Mine stayed untouched long enough for the sauce to begin setting at the edges. Daniel reached across the table, not for my hand, but for the small lamp between us. He angled it away from my eyes.
You never open your curtains before noon.
I work better in the dark.
Food tastes better before it goes cold.
It was a plain sentence. That was why it landed. He knew things about me the way neighbors do. By living close and paying attention, he needed neither stolen passwords nor hijacked lenses. Across the table, the difference burned. For a few minutes I was present. I imagined answering his taps before he had time to worry, opening the curtains while the sun was still useful, letting attention arrive without a screen between us. My phone vibrated. I ignored it. It vibrated again. Daniel was mid-sentence about a delivery driver and a misdelivered bookshelf. I watched his mouth move while the phone seemed to pulse against the table. Finally, I turned it over. The screen showed an image I had never requested. Jacob stood before a fogged mirror. His ivory shirt was open at the throat. One hand rested against the glass, the emblem ring visible. Across the condensation, written by a finger pressing from the other side of the image, were 2 words. Come back. I opened the file details. No sender, no camera ID, no network route, no creation time. I copied it to an isolated folder. The image smeared. Jacob's face split into vertical bands. The letters stretched and vanished. My phone returned an error as if the file had never existed.
Niana.
Daniel's voice sounded farther away than it was. I checked the device logs. Nothing had arrived. The phone had no record of displaying the image.
Niana, look at me.
I did. The warmth had left his face. He saw the fear before I could name it.
I need to go.
I'll come with you.
You can't.
Why?
Because I had spent years committing crimes for the privilege of watching a man who might not be human. Because that man had just placed an impossible message on my phone while I sat across from someone else. Because telling the truth would make Daniel responsible for deciding whether to report me, protect me, or walk away.
I have work.
That isn't what this is.
I stood and reached for my coat. Daniel stepped aside and cleared the aisle.
If you're in danger, let me help.
I'm not.
Then stop asking me to stand close enough to worry and far enough to know nothing.
I could not answer without opening a door I had spent years sealing shut. Outside, the rain had sharpened. Daniel called my name once. I turned. He stood beneath the restaurant awning, hands at his sides, waiting to see whether I would come back. There were people passing between us. None of them looked like the answer. My phone vibrated. This time the screen showed a photograph of my own phone in my hand. Daniel's message open, my reply visible beneath it. The angle came from behind my chair, where no one had been sitting. At the top of the photographed screen was the time, 8:06 p.m., the exact minute I had accepted the invitation. I walked home alone. Chapter 7, The Warning. I dismantled my apartment before dawn. Outlet covers came off. The router went into a shielded box. I swept every frequency I could receive, checked the window seals, examined the locks, and pulled 12 hours of building camera footage. The logs showed no entry, no transmission, no unfamiliar device touching my network. The absence of evidence irritated me more than evidence would have. Evidence could be named, it could be isolated, copied, attacked. At 4:31 a.m., an account I had stolen months earlier received an encrypted message. The account belonged to a contractor who had once handled Jacob's travel systems, dormant, routed outside his known network. Whoever sent the message was avoiding him. I decrypted it. Nyana Jacobs, disconnect. Destroy your local equipment. Leave the city before sunset. Do this now, and I will bury what remains of the trace. No greeting, no claim that this was for my good. The sender signed only H.L. Helen Langford. A second block followed. If Jacob Rosier offers his word, do not accept ordinary language as protection. A vampire vow binds only when spoken over his own blood with exact conditions. If he knowingly breaks it, he will lose the ability to feed and deteriorate until the violation is repaired to the extent possible. Wording matters. He has lived long enough to fit himself inside a loophole. I read the word vampire 3 times. Then I read the first instruction again. Leave the city. Movement would confirm location. Destroying my equipment would remove the only record I controlled. Helen was offering me disappearance on terms that left me with nothing I could prove. I replied with a blank message to test the route. The account closed before it sent. I should have obeyed. Instead, I opened a clean drive and began building leverage. Authentication logs, corrupted clips, scheduling anomalies, the blood on Jacob's cuff, records of identities that had not aged properly, fragments of Helen's cleanup activity. I added my own notes and enough access history to prove how I had obtained everything. That last part made the archive dangerous to me as well. It was incomplete, ugly, and legally catastrophic. I encrypted it behind a phrase I had never written down. No automatic release. Dead man switches failed. Services changed ownership. People mistook automation for certainty because they did not understand how often unattended systems broke. If the archive was ever opened, I would open it myself. Then I began deleting Jacob. The first interview clip went easily. The cufflink folders took longer. I erased private calls I had never played aloud, sleeping footage I had watched until the compression artifacts felt familiar, hundreds of still frames of his hands. I deleted the first blood-stained cuff, restored it from trash, deleted it again. Deleting files no one had asked me to keep felt uncomfortably personal. The final window was the bedroom feed. Jacob stood near the curtains, reading. A fine-knit gray pullover, sleeves pushed to his forearms. Nothing about the scene acknowledged me. I watched for 1 full minute. Then I closed the access route and wiped the keys. His face disappeared from my screens for the first time in years. The apartment became very quiet. Relief never came. Closing the final feed felt like reaching for a stair that was not there. Behind me, the bedroom window latch lifted. I turned so quickly my chair struck the desk. The curtain moved inward on cold air. The window stood open. Nothing was outside except rain and the black reflection of my own room. I sat with my back to the wall until the sky began to gray, and I did not look at the window again. Chapter 8, The Mark. I woke with the blanket twisted around my legs and a dark mark beneath my jaw. Small, almost circular, with 2 tender points hidden inside the bruise. My window was still open. The rain had stopped. Nothing on the sill had been disturbed. Daniel knocked while I was examining the mark in the bathroom mirror. He held a screwdriver against his palm. Concern already settled across his face.
You said the lamp flickers.
I didn't say you had to fix it today.
You also didn't say thank you for dinner.
I paid for my half.
That was not the expensive part.
I nearly closed the door. Then he saw the bruise.
What happened?
I slept badly.
On a fork?
I touched the mark too quickly. He noticed. Daniel's gaze moved past me toward the open window.
There was a man on this floor before dawn.
Every muscle in my back tightened.
What man?
Tall, dark coat. I was taking trash down. He came from this end of the hall.
He frowned.
I looked away before I understood why.
What do you remember? That he knew where he was going, and that I didn't want him to notice me.
That last part he said quietly, like it still confused him. It should have. Whatever Jacob projected when he moved through a space, that particular quality of presence that cameras softened without capturing, it worked on people without their knowing. Daniel missed very little. The involuntary glance away told me more than any description could. I let him repair the lamp because refusing would have confirmed too much. While he worked, I watched his reflection in my dead central monitor. Warm skin, damp blonde curls, sleeves rolled to the elbows. Entirely human, entirely present. When he finished,
Another dinner.
he set the screwdriver down.
Is that an invitation or an apology?
A test.
His face changed. I regretted the word, but not enough to explain it.
Of me?
No.
That isn't reassuring.
I may have attracted someone dangerous through my work.
What kind of work?
The kind I can't discuss.
He picked up his jacket.
You can stay at my place, or I'll pay for a hotel and sleep in the lobby. But I'm not helping you pretend this is manageable if you won't tell me what I'm stepping into.
I don't know what you're stepping into.
At least that was honest.
He set the screwdriver down again.
One condition. If something changes, you tell me before you decide what I'm allowed to risk. I leave when I choose to leave.
I nodded. His shoulders eased. After he left, I set the apartment trap. Dark thread across the window latch and the door. Pressure sensors beneath the bedroom rug. 2 independent battery cameras that had never touched Jacob's systems. Then I returned to the earliest breach logs. I found the marker at 6:12 that evening. A legitimate household account inside Jacob's home had authenticated to the vulnerable device minutes before my first scan detected it. The access had altered one setting and nothing else. The door had been opened from inside. I sat very still, the childhood keepsake cold against my chest. I had not discovered him. I had answered an invitation. Chapter 9, On Your Floor. The following evening, Daniel watched me check the burner beneath the table.
You're using yourself as bait.
I had chosen a crowded restaurant with mirrored walls, visible exits, and cameras on both the door and the street. The burner had never touched my home network. It transmitted my location to an emergency service under a false identity, while my apartment sensors reported clean.
I'm proving a condition.
What condition?
That whoever entered my apartment needs me to be gone.
You thought this person couldn't reach you in public.
I still do.
You thought.
His thumb stopped against the glass.
And you agreed I get to decide what I risk.
I know.
That isn't the same as telling me.
I looked down at the burner. Door thread intact, window thread intact, no pressure changes. Both cameras recording an empty apartment. Daniel rubbed one thumb along the edge of his glass.
Tell me his name.
I looked up. His expression was calm, which meant he had already understood enough to be hurt.
I never said it was a man.
You didn't have to.
I could have told him then. Not everything, but enough.
He can't reach us here.
Daniel leaned back.
You keep saying can't when you mean you don't understand how.
We left by the brightest route. Rain shone on the pavement. I checked reflections in shop windows and saw only Daniel beside me. Hands visible, pace adjusted to mine. At our floor, the hallway was quiet. My burner still showed an untouched apartment. Daniel stopped between our doors.
I want honesty. Even if you don't want me, even if this ends with you telling me to leave you alone, I can survive a clear answer. I'm getting tired of surviving around the spaces where yours should be.
I looked at his mouth. It would have been easy. He would have let the moment belong to both of us. He would have waited for the last inch. I moved closer. The hallway lights went out. Something breathed behind me. Not close enough to touch. Close enough that the cold arrived before the sound, the way winter does through a gap under a door. Daniel was in front of me. He caught my arms.
Niana.
The lights returned. A tall silhouette turned into the service stairwell. Daniel saw it. He went after it. I seized the back of his jacket with both hands.
No.
Who was that?
Inside. Now.
Niana.
Please.
The words stopped him more effectively than force. I pushed him toward his apartment, waited until his lock turned, then entered mine and sealed the door. Every thread was intact. Every sensor read 0. The independent cameras showed empty rooms. From the other side of the shared wall came 2 taps. I raised my hand. Before I answered, my central monitor turned on. Then the laptop. Then the phone beside my bed. You left me alone. I have never left you alone. The bedroom recording played again. My sleeping body, the pale hand, short black strands lifted from my nape, the mark beneath my jaw. This time, when I tried to transfer the file to an untouched drive, the screen convulsed. Each replay distorted more severely until Jacob's arm became a black-edged smear, and a shape appeared behind my reflection in the dead glass. Text formed beneath the frozen hand. You looked everywhere except beside you. The screens changed. Jacob stood in his bedroom with blood on his mouth. His blue eyes found the camera.
You allowed him to touch you.
The microphone icon was active now. I pressed it.
You opened the first device.
Yes,
I found the internal authentication marker.
I expected you would.
How long have you known?
From the first second you entered.
My hands felt numb.
Why?
To see whether you would come in.
The room behind him was familiar. Gray curtains, pale walls, the narrow clock on the bedside table. Blood brightened the defined line of his mouth.
Every camera? Every call? You knew?
I knew when you were connected.
That isn't an answer.
It is the answer I am giving you now.
Were you in my apartment?
His gaze dropped to the mark beneath my jaw.
I have stood beside your bed more often than you have slept through an entire night this year.
My stomach dropped.
What are you?
The blue of his eyes darkened until the irises were nearly black. Fine veins appeared at his temples. His upper lip lifted, and 2 narrow fangs descended, slowly, with the intimacy of something being shown rather than threatened. The image warped around his face.
Say it.
Vampire.
The word sounded childish in my apartment. The thing on the screen did not.
You're a monster.
You read my private messages. You listened to calls made in rooms where no one else was permitted. You watched me undress and sleep.
You entered my home.
Yes.
You fed from me.
Yes.
He left the comparison unspoken. That made it harder to dismiss. My own violations were already in the room with us, and he knew it, and he was going to keep knowing it.
The footage.
There are no cameras here.
No.
Then how?
A remembered image can be impressed into a machine I have handled, not live. Memory.
I looked at the 3 glowing devices.
You touched these.
Yes.
My phone beside the bed, my laptop, once found closed when I remembered leaving it open, the central monitor with a faint mark on the frame I had blamed on myself.
The photograph of my message to Daniel, 8:06.
I was behind your chair when you sent it. The kitchen you believed you were watching was an older memory.
The broken glass had been real once. He had replayed it for me while standing close enough to read over my shoulder.
The more often I force a memory into them, the less cleanly they hold it.
I focused on the bedroom clock behind him. The second hand reached 11, jumped back, reached 11 again. The curtain moved in the same small arc every 6 seconds.
That isn't live.
No.
The projection shuddered, his face doubled, then reformed.
That room is empty.
A sound came from the hallway, not a knock. The soft closing of the stairwell door.
Where are you?
The false bedroom dissolved into static. The final image came from his remembered point of view in my hallway. The exit sign blinking twice in the same pattern. The frame skipping at the same patch of carpet as it advanced toward my door.
On your floor.
Chapter 10. The Recovery Team. My phone rang before I could move. Unknown number. I answered on speaker. Helen Langford's voice was lower than I expected, some polished, unhurried, the voice of someone who has delivered bad news enough times to stop softening it.
You had one opportunity to leave quietly.
I kept my eyes on the door.
Your warning was not generous.
The warning was real. Whether you found it kind was irrelevant.
A building alert opened on my laptop. 3 visitors had entered the lobby under contractor credentials that had not existed 10 minutes earlier.
Mr. Graves preserved part of your original route before someone corrupted it. That gave him the district. Your overnight access to this building's maintenance system gave him the address and unit.
My attempt to prove no one had entered had completed his trace.
You copied material instead of disappearing. Your equipment is now a liability I cannot permit you to retain.
The lobby camera showed a compact woman with a dark auburn bob leading 2 people toward the elevator. Rebecca Sloan. Her badge passed the building scanner green.
You sent armed people into my home?
I sent professionals to retrieve stolen property and prevent a public disaster. I sent you the valve mechanism because I wanted you outside his reach, not helpless inside it. You chose to stay.
The call ended. On a separate camera, Daniel opened his apartment door. He had received the same building alert. He looked toward the elevator, then back inside. When he emerged again, he carried a small bunch of pale flowers. He had bought them before tonight. He had not given them to me after the lights failed in the hallway. My throat closed. Jacob's voice came through the speakers.
I can stop them.
Where are you?
Close enough.
The elevator began rising. Daniel crossed the hallway and knocked.
Niana, there are people downstairs asking about your unit.
I went to the door but did not touch the lock. The elevator passed the 4th floor.
Niana, are you safe?
He is standing where they will arrive.
Daniel knocked again.
Open the door.
The word run reached my mouth and died there. Pulling him inside meant trapping him with whatever moved through my building without appearing on cameras. Sending him out meant he would ask why. There was no version where he did not pay for my choices. The flowers were still in his hand.
You don't sound safe.
I know.
Open the door.
The elevator reached the 7th floor. I placed my palm flat against the wood between us.
I don't feel the way you do.
Silence. The elevator rose another level.
I never did. I agreed to the dates because I was trying to prove something to myself. You need to leave and not come back.
Daniel's face in the hallway camera went very still. He knew I was lying about something. He also knew I had chosen the lie over trusting him.
I'm leaving. But if this is another lie meant to control what I know, contact me only when you're ready to stop.
He set the flowers outside my door. I opened the service stairwell through the building system and cut the alarm on his route.
Use the east stairs, not the elevator.
He hesitated, then obeyed. The elevator reached my floor as the stairwell door closed behind him. Seconds later, 2 taps came through the shared wall. Safe. I put my hand against the wall. I did not answer. The elevator doors opened. Rebecca stepped into the hallway with her pale gray equipment case. One team member watched the stairwell. The other checked unit numbers. Jacob's voice came from behind me.
You chose correctly.
I spun. He stood reflected in the black central monitor. Then he was directly behind my chair. In person, he was exactly the man I had watched, and wrong in every way the cameras had softened. Taller than the rooms around him, too still even while breathing. His pale skin held none of the warmth screens had invented. His blue eyes had returned, but something behind them was unlit, the way a window looks occupied from outside at night and empty once you're inside. He wore the deep blue coat from my childhood memory. Rain darkened one shoulder, though I had heard no window open.
I kept him alive. Don't turn that into something I gave you.
Jacob looked toward the shared wall.
He is inside.
How do I know?
I can hear his kettle.
The detail was so ordinary I believed him. A gloved knock at my door.
Miss Jacobs, building security. We need to speak with you.
Jacob moved toward the door. His fangs were already visible. I stepped between him and it. He stopped close enough that the cold from his coat reached my bare arms.
There are 3.
They leave alive.
They entered for you.
They entered because of what I did.
And they will take you.
Then we stop them without killing them.
His eyes darkened. I pulled the metal archive case from beneath the desk and placed my hand on its biometric lock.
If you touch anyone in that hallway, I decrypt this.
You expose yourself with me.
I know.
The knocking hardened.
If you kill them, I release everything. And then I make sure you never receive another willing look, word, or touch from me. You can stand beside my bed for the rest of my life and know that the only part you wanted is gone.
His expression held. Then a deeper stillness took him, the taut kind that meant something was being restrained.
You think that will stop me?
I think it already did.
The door handle shifted under Rebecca's tool. Jacob stared at me for one long second, then moved away from the door.
Far end of the hall.
Let them see enough to retreat. You do not touch them.
He vanished. The hallway camera lost 3 frames. When it recovered, Jacob stood beside the service stairwell behind Rebecca's lookout. Pale, motionless, wrong in every way a person standing in a hallway should not be. The sight was enough. The lookout swore. Rebecca spun with a compact weapon raised. Its white strobe struck Jacob full in the face. His image tore sideways across her body camera, but he remained standing.
Back to the car. Camera on him. Move.
Her team withdrew toward the elevator. Rebecca entered last. I used my maintenance credentials to close the doors and sent the car down 1 level. She drove a steel pry tool into the seam. The doors struck it, reopened, stopped. I cut power and engaged the brake. Metal rang through the shaft. Jacob appeared at the stalled doors. A deep impact traveled through the wall as he bent the steel inward. Rebecca's transmission indicator stayed clean on an isolated band, competent, infuriating. He returned to the apartment with one hand cut by steel.
I can't reach the camera.
I pulled the wideband test transmitter from beneath my desk and fed it into the building's maintenance line down the shaft, flooding the modem's remaining range with noise. The body camera indicator flickered. Rebecca struck the side of the unit, saw the fallback fail, and ordered her team to record locally. Jacob's silhouette crossed the gap faster than the frame rate could hold. The last transmitted image caught a pale hand bending steel. Then the uplink died. I released the brake, sent the elevator to the lobby under fire service control, and opened the exterior doors. Rebecca's team left with the local recording but did not attempt my floor again. Jacob returned to the apartment. Hunger had stripped some of the polish from him. The veins at his temples were darker. His mouth remained slightly open around his fangs. He stopped several feet away, his bloodied hand hanging open at his side. For the first time since I had known his face, he waited for me to decide the distance. I held my ground and measured the distance between us. It was already a negotiation, and I had fewer cards. Chapter 11, The Ruined Suite. Helen called again when the recovery team reached the street. Her video appeared on one monitor. Ash-brown hair, pale green eyes, a line between her brows that had not been there in photographs from 5 years ago. She wore no expression that could be mistaken for relief.
The camera transmitted.
How much?
Enough.
Jacob set his phone beside mine. On it was an encrypted ledger, the oldest file created 17 years earlier, revised so many times the version history filled the screen. False identities, destroyed investigations, payments to witnesses who later vanished, death certificates attached to names Jacob had used and abandoned. Helen's signatures appeared rarely, but her hand was visible in the pattern.
If your trace or recording is released, this goes with it.
Helen's gaze shifted to him.
And if Niana disappears or I die, both files leave isolated storage.
So we understand each other.
No. We understand the available damage.
She looked at me.
Ask him about the broker who traced your address 2 years ago.
The call ended. I turned to Jacob. He had removed his coat. Beneath it, a pale stone shirt open at the neck. Blood from his hand marked one cuff.
Did you kill the broker?
Yes.
The answer arrived before I finished breathing.
He intended to sell your identity and proof of the breach.
You could have gone to the police.
So could you.
I stepped away. The movement was small. He noticed it anyway. He noticed everything, had been noticing everything for years, filing each detail of me with the same patience he had applied to the trace, to the open door, to the camera in the room where I first watched him undress.
How many people?
For you?
The question made my skin crawl.
1 confirmed. Others were prevented before a sale required final action.
He left the ugliness intact. No one else was permitted to reach you first. In his mouth, the broker's murder became a boundary condition of possession.
That is not protection.
It is in my vocabulary.
The room seemed colder, though the window was closed. His cut hand had stopped bleeding. A dark line remained beneath one fingernail, and his eyes were still nearly black from hunger. He had killed a stranger 2 years earlier, then returned to his rooms and allowed me to watch him, as though no body lay behind the privacy I found so beautiful. I had watched him and saved the clips. Somewhere along the way, seeing him had begun to feel like protection against surprise. I was still being surprised. I opened the building feed. Daniel had locked his door, set his phone on the counter, and stood there with both hands braced and his head lowered. Alive, physically unharmed, hurt in every way my cameras could not measure. I looked at the archive case. One touch would still expose all 3 of us. It could punish Jacob. It could not restore the broker or undo what I had drawn Daniel into. I switched the feed off.
Why me?
Jacob's gaze moved to the keepsake at my throat. He crossed to the coat he had left on the chair and removed a narrow antique case from an inner pocket. The hinge made a dry sound when he opened it. Inside lay the half of a sweet I had given him beneath the winter tree. It had blackened and collapsed into its paper. The sugar had fused into a hard, dark mass. It did not look preserved, it looked exhumed, like something that had been in the ground and was only now being asked to account for itself.
You kept that.
Yes.
It's rotten.
I know.
He told me the rest without asking forgiveness. He had approached that day intending to erase my memory of him. After hearing my mother call from the road, he watched only long enough to decide whether I was a risk. Then I gave him half of what I had without being asked.
No one had given me anything freely and longer than you can understand.
That does not make a child sweet a promise.
No.
When my family left, he searched for me. Intermittently, the word almost insulting in its restraint. Years later, a photograph, me wearing the emblem.
So you built the weakness.
I opened one door and waited.
And when I entered,
I watched what kept you connected, and then I gave you more of it.
It like a method, not a confession. When I stayed longer on the bedroom camera, he returned to it. When I replayed an image of his bare hands, he removed his gloves within range. When I withdrew, he offered something private enough to make leaving feel like loss. A sleepless night, a half-heard call, blood on white cloth. He had measured my attention and adjusted himself around it for years.
You made a prison out of one thoughtless kindness.
I made use of what it revealed.
He held the open case toward me.
You may destroy it.
The offer cost him nothing. He understood what I needed to do, and the gesture changed nothing. I took the ruined sweet, placed it on the table, and crushed it beneath the heavy base of a drinking glass. It resisted once, then broke into black crumbs. I ground the remains until the paper tore. When I finished, I closed the antique case while it was empty. I had destroyed the object. The architecture it had built was still standing. Chapter 12. No camera between us. The apartment door was still unlocked from Rebecca's override. I walked toward it. Jacob let me. That mattered less than it should have. The open doorway offered little freedom while Helen held my location, a distorted recording, and enough evidence to place me inside his network. Without his interference, the next people at my door would carry warrants. My archive was leverage I had no clean ground to use. My crimes were older than tonight, better documented than I had intended, and attached to a man who had just bent elevator doors with his hands. I opened the door. Gray dawn diluted the hallway lights. Jacob stood several paces behind me.
Helen still has the trace. If I stop managing what follows, your arrest becomes a matter of time.
Is that protection or a leash?
Both?
He left the coercion bare. The leash was simply another fact, offered without apology. Daniel's flowers were on the floor where he had left them, pale, already losing their edges in the gray light. I looked at them for a moment and then looked away. I closed the door.
Do not call that surrender.
Jacob watched me close the door. That was answer enough. I locked the archive inside its case and slid it beneath the lowest shelf, shut down the building controls, crossed to the sink to wash my hands, and stood there too long with the water running, watching the pink swirl of Jacob's blood thin and disappear. I turned the tap off and could not immediately remember whether I had already locked the archive or only meant to. I was almost certain. I removed the childhood keepsake from around my neck. The cord had left a faint line against my skin. I set it beside the locked archive. Not thrown away, set down. There was a difference, and I was the only one who would know it. Only then did I face him.
Are you going to kill me?
No.
Turn me?
Not without your consent.
I laughed once without humor.
You found that principle tonight?
Killing you ends this. Turning you without consent leaves me with someone who will hate me forever and cannot get away.
His gaze stayed level.
I want you able to refuse me.
Because refusal makes yes worth more.
I can stop you from leaving. That would not make you choose me.
He spoke as if naming the limits of a machine. The cold precision was easier to bear than tenderness. Tenderness would have demanded another decision, and I was tired of deciding. I touched the mark beneath my jaw.
Awake. If I say stop, you stop.
His body became completely still.
Say it once.
He approached only after I held my ground. His fingers touched the bruise beneath my jaw, cold enough to make me inhale.
I tasted you while you slept. When you closed the feed, I needed proof you were still here. A sleeping body was all I could reach without hearing you refuse me.
I struck him. The sound was sharp in the small apartment. His face turned slightly. A red mark appeared against his pale cheek and faded almost at once. His body erasing the evidence of consequence, the way it erased everything inconvenient.
That was for entering my room. for touching me, for deciding my ignorance counted as access.
He looked back at me, hands loose at his sides. The apology never came. He took the blow and held the distance I had created, patient enough to wait long after I was tired. That was the part I kept coming back to. He was patient in a way that had nothing to do with kindness. He could wait because he had time, and I did not, and he knew it. I caught the open collar of his shirt and pulled him down to me. He kissed me hard enough to jar my teeth. My back struck the desk. The dead monitor trembled above us. Somewhere in that first impact, calculation broke. I answered him with my body before I could decide whether I meant to. His hands stopped at my waist. He held still until I dragged his open shirt from his shoulders. The pause left the next movement mine. I took it before thought could catch up. My hands moving through the narrow space exhaustion had opened between judgment and action. I pulled him closer. His fingers tightened through the thin fabric of my blouse. He knew where I would turn my face before I did, knew the hitch in my breathing when his mouth reached my throat. He had learned all of it. He used it now the way someone uses a key they have spent a long time cutting, not forcing, not needing to.
You studied this.
I studied you.
The anger remained, buried beneath the heavier things, pressing down on me. At the bed, he stopped again. I sat on the edge, grateful for the solid surface beneath me. I undressed myself. His knowledge would not become permission simply because exhaustion had blurred the boundary. His gaze followed every movement, dark and fixed, while I made him wait until I reached for him.
Here, awake, looking at you.
He undressed. I could touch the shoulder I had only ever seen through compression. I caught his wrist when he moved too fast, placed his hand where I wanted it, moved it when I did not. Each correction made something tight and furious cross his face. He obeyed every time. Whatever meaning he found in his obedience, I left it with him. When our bodies joined, his cold struck through me and pulled out a sound I had not planned. He went still, forehead against mine, waiting for permission. I kept my eyes open and nodded. After that, I set the pace when I needed to. His restraint frayed eventually, breath uneven, hands losing their perfect stillness. The fracture was involuntary and therefore useful. I filed it away as I once filed details from his cameras, information for later. When it was over, I lay beneath him and stared at the ceiling and waited for my pulse to slow. He shifted his weight before I asked. I pulled the blanket up. He took that as permission to return his mouth to the mark beneath my jaw. His fangs pressed against the tender skin. He waited. I lay still beneath the pressure of his fangs, counting how many more yeses might come before I found another answer, and whether I could survive the number. The calculation dissolved before it reached an end. The room tilted. I had been awake too long. I put one hand at the back of his neck.
Yes.
The bite reopened cleanly. Warmth drained from my skin. The dead monitors stayed dark. No visions this time. Only the pressure of his mouth, and the slow, meticulous drawing of what I had left to give, and the ceiling above me unchanged. My fingers tightened in his hair, not to pull him closer, to have something to hold.
Stop.
He stopped, drew back, moved one deliberate step away with his hunger still visible in the darkness of his eyes. A line of my blood marked his lower lip, and he looked at me with that patient, satisfied expression, the expression of a man who has retrieved something he thought he might lose. And I understood again that stopping when I said stop was not mercy. It was maintenance. I got up slowly, found the wall, the bathroom, the gauze. I pressed it to my throat and sat on the edge of the tub because standing required more coordination than I currently had. The fluorescent light was unkind. I looked at my own reflection in the mirror above the sink and looked away. When the stain stopped spreading, I went back to the bedroom, pulled my sweater on, and stood at the window until the cold reached my face. Jacob settled at the edge of the bed and watched the thin gray line at the curtain's edge, the approaching dawn, measuring how much time he had before he had to move. I watched him watch it. Outside the door, Daniel's flowers were going cold in the hallway. I had sent him away to protect him, also to protect myself. The two reasons sat together without resolving, and I left them there. He would be confused and hurt, but alive. I had preserved that much, along with my distance from custody and Daniel's distance from whatever Jacob might do if he decided Daniel still mattered to me. Even exhausted, I could see the mechanism from inside it. For now, that clarity was mine. Jacob had shaped the trap to my loneliness and waited until every exit failed. Tonight it closed. He had finally put me where he wanted me. He had mistaken position for permanence. I turned from the window. He was watching me, always watching, with the settled hunger of a man who believed he had recovered something lost. I looked back at him and said nothing. He accepted my silence as an answer. I crossed the room, pulled back the blanket, and lay down on the side closest to the door. After a moment, he sat at the edge of the bed. The gray line at the curtain's edge was widening. He would have to move soon, to the interior rooms, away from the glass. I closed my eyes before any of what I was thinking could travel to my face. I was very good at watching without being seen. I had learned that long before I ever found his network. And whatever he believed he had recovered tonight, whatever he thought he had finally permanently secured, he had not secured the part of me that was still watching. That part was awake. That part was going to stay awake.
I hope I kept you company with my story. It would mean so much for you to like and subscribe because it helps me make more. I'll see you in the next one.